Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mush Ali, Director at 110 Associates. Welcome to Series 1 of 1 to 10 with 110. This will be a series of podcasts aimed at giving invaluable insights from the CFO, COO community within the fund space. It's something that we're really passionate about. I really do hope this will help the upcoming talent, people in the seat today, or maybe helping a hiring manager thinking about hiring a COO, CFO, and really just try to understand the challenges, the mistakes, the lessons learned from our panel of experts. Welcome back to episode 1, part 2. In this episode, we sit down with Richard and have a really interesting insight to his 20-year, 30-year journey throughout his journey to becoming a COO and a CEO. Part 1 was, Richard was great. If you haven't listened to part 1, do listen to it because you get some great snippets on just some of the top tips he gave us, which I think is invaluable. And this part is really giving everyone a really good insight to how you can build your career and how you become a COO and how you kind of work your way up through your career to get to that point. So I thoroughly enjoyed the chat. I hope you guys do too as well. Without further ado, I hope you enjoyed part 2. Richard has been a COO for over 20 years, where he's been the COO of an asset management arm of a bank. He's been the COO of Europe for TPG Axon. At the same time, he joined as the COO of Trafalgar Asset Management when it first split and was their first COO of the new split firm. And since then, has continued the last, I think, 10 years there, Richard?
10 years, 10 years.
And is now, I understand, a special advisor, which I didn't know until yesterday. But anyway, let me pass it to Richard. Richard, take us through the Richard story, the Richard journey, right? Where did it all first start?
Well, first of all, thank you, Mush, for having me. And secondly, I hope I don't bore everyone stiff by my own personal story. It started back in 1980 when I joined Deloitte Haskins & Sells as a trainee accountant. And Deloitte is now part of, or that part of Deloitte Haskins & Sells is now part of Price Waterhouse, the firm that I originally joined. I qualified as an accountant, did some insolvency work with them, and one of the insolvency clients I had was a stockbroker who, I think the term in those days was got hammered, i.e. became insolvent. I never quite worked out how or why, but it gave me a taste for the city and wanting to join the city. And I decided that that it was time to move on from Deloitte, and I moved to James Capel. And at James Capel, I got given 2 pieces of work as a project accountant. One was to figure out what to do with their asset management business, and the other was to help the firm join the various CROs as the Financial Services Act came into being. And that gave me exposure to senior partners at James Capel. And I guess I got noticed, and cut a long story short, I ended up joining the emerging asset management division as the financial controller and company secretary. That actually, at a very young age, put me on the board of the company, or gave me access to the board. And from
how old
there,
were you then, Richard? May I? Do you remember how old were you then? That's like
I was late 20s.
Yeah. Wow.
Late 20s.
It's a very early exposure to
it was very early exposure to people who were sort of in their 40s and 50s at that time.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you think these are people that were born in the 1930s and 40s, just to put it into perspective, you know, some of whom had fought in the Second World War just to really,
old school mentality then.
Yeah, get a very old school mentality. Certainly, you know, you almost called them sir. In those days. But the thing that they passed on to me was a lot of experience and wisdom. And I guess I was young, eager to learn, and I listened. And actually, interesting enough, there came a point where I was approached to become a fund manager. And I had a long chat with a senior partner of James Capel, who basically gave me some very good advice. And that was, you know, if you want a board position, doing what you're doing, particularly on the compliance side, is something that's new and emerging, and you're already an expert in this area. And this will be a very good ticket to board positions in asset management. She was a lady, and she was an asset management partner. And she gave me this really good advice to actually stick to my knitting. Don't go back. You understand what fund managers do. You've been grounded in fund management already at James Capel. Stick with it. And I did. And that took me through my career. And to fast forward through Salomons and Kemper, Zurich, Scudder, which was 3 mergers in 3 years. I got a lot of experience. Going to Salomons gave me US experience, which on top of some very traditional UK asset management and stockbroking experience was invaluable. And then I became finance director of what was Kemper, became Zurich, was taken over by the Zurich group, and then merged with Scudder, which was a real mess, but taught me a lot about how not to do mergers and acquisitions. The thing I took away from that was the only thing to worry about is the people, because the rest of it will take care of itself. If you get the people right, the rest will fall into place. And I've certainly passed on that advice to others going through similar situations, and I can tell you from experience it works.
2 key bits of advice there, which I think is gold dust, and it's something that I'm always talking about as well. But the focus on what you do and do it really well, right? And the people that were around you, right? And understanding the people around you, I guess.
Understanding the people around you, and also taking notice of all the grey hair around you when you're young. You know, they've got a lot of knowledge and wisdom. You may think, ooh, they're a bit, you know, they're past it or whatever. Forget that. They probably are. But pick their brains, learn from their experience. Because sure enough, what goes around comes around.
No, and I think, look, that's. But then, if you think back then, did you think that? Did you genuinely think that, or were they you like these?
Oh no. I thought just like my children now think about people of my generation. Oh God, you know, they don't know how it is these days, etc., etc. Things have changed. You know, you absorb is all I can say. You know, be like a sponge, just absorb.
But at the same time, it was an exciting place to be, right? So it was, you know,
it was exciting because actually asset management and fund management had been a sort of backroom activity that the sort of, you know, the bright guys had done in the background. They were the sort of the technocrats in the background. They'd done some fund management, but James Capel's main business was stockbroking and research in those days. And suddenly out of that came this asset management group. And, you know, even in those days, it had an SEC registered entity. It had a UK private client department with high net worth individuals. And then it had this institutional asset management business with some names that people would still die to have on their books today. You know, if I think about the client exposure I got all those years ago, it was terrific.
So when did you get first, or what point did you get promoted to that? Because you got promoted to COO? Is that what happened?
No, I was called company secretary.
Right. Okay.
In those days, but actually I was doing, I mean, fast forward to today, I would have been the COO.
You were the COO, okay.
And that would be
that like 99?
I was about 30.
Yeah. Okay.
I was, you know, 30 or thereabouts. But remember, I trained as an accountant. I'd done some insolvency work, and then I'd gone to James Capel. And I was probably a year, 18 months into my James Capel career when I got that promotion to the asset management division.
And then in terms of, I guess, that journey there, how long did you stay there until?
Well, interestingly, that's a good question. There was one point where I thought, well, I'm here forever. But actually, what happened was HSBC, as you know, got taken over by and morphed into HSBC. And the partnership at those days, headline news, was sort of broken up very, very quickly. And I remember the days when you could go out to lunch. I was taken out to lunch by another. Actually, this was the World War II veteran that I mentioned earlier, or alluded to earlier, I was taken out to lunch with him, and he said, "It pains me to say this to you, old boy, but it's time you moved on." And the reason is because this firm is not what it used to be. And then gave me, he really articulated why it was time to move on.
Wow.
And he says, "I can't tell you how much it pains me to tell you, but please take my advice."
Which is, with all due respect, Richard, incredibly rare. Incredibly rare.
I was unbelievably lucky.
For this senior was management to. I don't think I know people who genuinely take a real interest in their staff and their teams and want them to do well. Very rarely are they telling them to move on like you were told.
Well, do you know what? I've told people I love helping. I love mentoring younger people.
Yeah.
That's something I really do. Probably this fellow and the lady I mentioned earlier probably influenced me in ways I really don't think about every day. In the sense that they took an interest in me, and I feel I should pass that on to others. Because it is very difficult to find your way in the city unless people do take an interest in your career or are willing to talk about your career or coach you in how you should move forward in your career. And there are times when I've interviewed people when I've told them, "Do you know what? I think you're a great candidate, but go back to where you are. You're much better off where you are. You don't realize it now, but believe me." And people have come back to me years later, said, "You gave me some advice." And I went, "Oh, did I?" And then they tell me this story, and I think, gosh, absolutely. And I was right, wasn't I? And they go, "Yep, you were absolutely right. I'm now an MD or equivalent." I was just going through a bad patch, or, I had a boss I didn't like at the time, but you know what? Nobody liked them and they moved on pretty quickly, and it's interesting. It's a bit like the current crisis we're in now. It seems, it's Groundhog Day again, and it seems to be going on forever. But, when you look back on it, it was only a short period of time and you get through it.
Only a year. I mean, so in terms of, so that you had that really interesting conversation, was the next move to Montreal, or was there one in between?
No, the next move from there was to Salomons, and it was getting some US experience. And again, he gave me this advice that, go and work for the Americans. Now, remember, this is now early 90s, and the Americans have taken over a number of city institutions. And his advice was, go and learn from them. See what they do. And I walked out of the most gentlemanly organization as a James Capel as was, into the sort of go grabbing,
brilliant grounding.
Salomons, Liar's Poker, you name it, it was there. The first meeting I had at Salomons was not, and I was, I think they called me business unit manager. Again, it would be called COO today. And one of the first meetings I had, and I also had a compliance hat on, and one of the first meetings I had was with a department of the bank. We were launching what actually wasn't called a hedge fund in those days, but today again would be a hedge fund. And the sales force were there to sell it, and all they were interested in was how much commission did they get personally. That was just such a different culture to the one I was used to. I came out of the meeting saying, did I really hear that guy? He didn't ask a thing about the product, blah, 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 blah. I can say this now, whatever we are, 20, 25, 30 years later. But, at the time, it was shocking to me. I'd come out of James Capel where everyone would be going, that's an interesting product, and how does that work, and et cetera, et cetera. None of that.
How long you at Salomon for?
I was there for I don't know, 2.5, 3 years, because I then got headhunted to become a finance director at Kemper.
That was it.
And that was again, it was a US entity, but it was one that was sort of down on its uppers, and was a great opportunity. And I was a finance director, and that seemed like a proper promotion into a what was a sort of bottom of the first division type firm, which had potential. Anyway, I can't remember quite. Well, within a year, it was taken over by the Zurich Group, which again was an interesting experience, because suddenly we were owned by an insurance company, and who really were finding it a struggle to understand asset management, and culturally was very different. And then one of my roles there was I was responsible for the, again, small asset management unit in Zurich, and teaching them compliance. Again, it was a different language for them. And I remember one story where we had to introduce PA trading to them, rules for PA trading. And I was taken out to lunch by the senior fund manager in his very, very smart M series BMW. And I sort of commented on his car, and I said, well, you can't be doing too badly here if you can afford, this. And he, over lunch, he said, how do you think I afford that car? And I went, well, you do quite well. He said, not a bit of it. I get paid a pittance. It's my PA trading that pays for things like this. But
in terms of sort of, because I guess by that point you've done a proper FD role, US manager, a US man, I guess a US bank and a British bank. Really and that. So we're what, 15 years in?
Yeah, we're talking. Yes, exactly. 15 years,
give or take, right?
Yes, 15 years into my career.
With a whole mixture of like different people, different environments, different cultures, that stuff, and actually varied roles as well. Not everything the same, right?
Absolutely, and I mean that's one of the joys of this type of role.
Yeah,
it is varied.
Yeah,
but also it teaches you to juggle a number of different responsibilities and different deadlines, as well as some things are desperately urgent, some things are less urgent, but you've got that variety. But part of the skill is to be able to juggle that variety.
No, absolutely, right. And in terms of the next, that was then, is that when Montreal came along? Is that right?
Yeah, no, yes. So no, ABN Amro came in the middle there. And then that I was appointed the COO of the London asset management business.
Got you. Yeah.
And interestingly, that role came about through the head of fixed income that I'd worked with at
Network
at Salomons.
Yeah.
And he contacted me because there'd been a compliance visit that hadn't gone as smoothly as they thought. Right. And they needed an expert to come, or somebody who understood it, to come in and just pull the strings together. There was a private client department, there was a fixed income department, there was a unit trust business, and there was nobody actually across all those businesses within the asset management division in London. And my role was to pull all that together, piece it together,
which is brilliant,
and navigate it into the wider ABN Amro network.
Yeah.
But that was my first time I had the title of COO.
Yeah.
And I think I was just 40 then. Then.
So I guess your first move was that you got that role as a result of knowing the head of fixed income, right? So
I got it as yes. I mean, it was a sort of introduction from him. I didn't get it because of him, because actually,
of course,
he left about the. I think he left about a week after I arrived.
Yeah.
But he moved on elsewhere and it became a very senior fixed income manager in the city. But actually, no, I ended up being introduced to his boss, who hired me, and I was on the management committee.
I guess where I'm going with that is as people are building their careers, is the network you build can be really powerful as you're trying to get to become a COO, and the network you build really is so important. And I guess listening to your story there, yes. But ultimately, you knew the head of fixed income that was there. He knew you. Obviously, did that. The rest of it is ultimately a process.
Yes, of course.
What I'm trying to get is what I think is really important in some of the things that I see doing what I do is that if people actually, wherever they work, get on with the people they work with, build strong networks. You don't know where it goes, right? You just don't know.
Exactly.
And for me, that's
Put
prime example.
Never shut a door. Never shut a door. Always, if you're moving on from somewhere, it's not because, you don't like someone or someone's treated you badly or, all those sort of deep down reasons that you really want to tell them. Don't. Just explain there's a better opportunity. Put it into a positive spin. There's a better opportunity out there. There's, it's somebody you've worked with before and you've really enjoyed working with them, and it's, again, a positive message.
But it was the truth, right? I mean, that's how that played out.
This was absolutely the truth. No, absolutely the truth. I mean, the reality was that I'd been through 3 mergers in 3 years, and there were some frustrations of working. Scudder took over the Zurich asset management business. They were given responsibility for it. We were managed out of the US. There was some, again, it was back to the sort of aggressive US management style, which which
you understood. Sorry to interrupt, but you understood because you'd previously worked at Salomon and understood that
exactly.
Culture. Otherwise,
exactly.
you found that hard, right?
It wasn't the culture that suited me best, but there were frustrations like you needed to get PA trade. I'm talking about PA trading again, but you need to get PA trading permission from the US. But they only operated between certain hours in the afternoon, just as the markets were about to close. It was silly things like that. Not that I do very much PA trading, but I remember I had Railtrack shares I was trying to sell at the time. Anyway, suffice it to say, I ended up with them when they all went bust, which is what really annoyed me about that particular issue. But it's little things sometimes that make all the difference, which when you're a manager, you must always think, actually, how would I feel if I was in that person's position? And that is an important point to think about when managing people. And it can be tricky at times, but try and put yourself into their position, how they feel about a certain situation. Particularly if you've got a difficult message to give to them.
So in terms of, and look, I definitely want to a bit later drill into some of those key skills that you're naturally touching through here, and we'll bring it back in a second. In terms of, so ABN Amro was how long? How long were you
ABN Amro was, it was, you're taking me back in history. It was 99 to 2005.
Okay.
So it was quite a long time.
6 years in that role.
Yeah.
And I guess really what I want to kind of get to now is sort of like, I guess the two things that you've gone into since then, Montreal. Tell us about Montreal.
Montreal was interesting because that was a startup. I'd done a very small startup that hadn't worked.
Okay.
Coming out of ABN Amro. Now, the interesting thing there was that at ABN Amro, I'd been given responsibility for we had a new boss at ABN Amro who merged all the operations of in Europe into and then outsourced it to State Street at the time. But he then decided that actually we didn't need all these COOs around Europe, and as part of cost cutting, he either let them go or redirected them elsewhere. And I remember chatting to me and looking at me and saying, "Oh, Richard, you seem to have several strings to your bow." This was a Dutch guy, by the way, who spoke excellent English, but he said, "You have several strings to your bow, one of which is you're an accountant. You should go and talk to the head of finance about a job there, in London. The second one is asset management." And he compartmentalized these. And the third one was compliance, and sent me off to see the head of compliance for roles in compliance, for roles in finance and asset management. He said, "Well, I'll have to have a think about that." And I tried to explain that first and foremost, I was an asset management person with this skill set within asset management. And he couldn't get his head around that. He thought that I had these Richard, separate silos.
At that point, you were ahead of your time, right? Because that candidate pool was not fully formed in asset management that had that breadth you had. So to take me through Montreal, and that was a startup. So what was that? How did that come about?
Yes. So basically that came about through, I'm just trying to think. I think it was Goldman Sachs. I knew the guys at Goldman Sachs well.
Yeah. And nice plug to Goldman Sachs there for anyone's listening to Goldman Sachs.
I should say, know the PBs. I should just go back just a second. The job I got at ABN Amro was to reorganize the emerging hedge fund business there.
Yeah.
But I sort of felt that they were having difficulty spelling asset management at the time, let alone alternative asset management.
Right. Yeah.
So as a result,
Yeah.
and at the same time, having accepted this role as, I had a very fancy title. I think it was Global COO of alternatives or something.
So where was that?
This was at ABN AMRO.
ABN AMRO, right.
And the reason for telling you this is because at the same time, I got a letter from HR, which I don't think even the head of asset management knew about, which was, as we've changed your job description, you have the option to leave with all your long-term incentive plans, etc., intact after 3 months. And I managed to get that. I managed to extend it to 9 months. And that's when I left. And I did a small startup, which didn't work. But I got to know the PBs during that time.
Yep.
And that was an important connection because, of course, getting to know PBs was the gateway to getting the Montreal startup.
Yep.
And that was the time when people were leaving Goldman Sachs
that was
to set up
2005-ish.
2006, actually, because I did a year with this startup that didn't work. Now, the one thing that was tricky was making the transition from large institution to small organization. Not so much because it was tricky for me, but it was tricky for people to actually take somebody from a large institution where you had all that support, so to speak, around you, to going to a 10, 20 person business. And if you think about it, ABN Amro, well, we had in-house operations until it was outsourced. I mean, I had 50 people, I think, or something I was looking after in that alone. So, you had direct reports and plus maybe 10 other people with legal compliance, whatever else was reporting into me, had a staff of maybe 60, even 70 people. And suddenly you were going to go into a business of between 10 and 15 people. And that, for people employing you at that point, was a bit of a concern. How would that person cope? So getting a small startup, albeit it didn't work, was helpful in the sense that it got me, I had then had experience of working in a small business.
How did you get that startup, the first one?
The first one came about through...
Was that network, right? Yeah.
Again, it was through the network.
So someone you knew, then Goldman, then
exactly.
Goldman came along with Montreal, right?
And they wanted somebody who sort of, understood the asset management business, and had... But the interesting thing, coming back to Montreal, was that I was the only candidate they saw that had long-only experience, hedge fund startup experience, large institutional, and I was on goodness knows how many boards at ABN AMRO, so I had sort of boardroom experience at a senior level through ABN AMRO, and then, tiny LLP partner experience. So I had the whole package.
Brilliant. And
which got me Montreal.
And Montreal, what did it launch with?
It 2.5 billion.
Launched with it, so it was a big launch.
I mean, it was a huge launch at the time.
One of the biggest launches, probably. Yeah, huge.
Well, no, because Eaton Park had launched around that time. There were a couple of others.
Yeah, big launch, right? You went in as employee number what?
So I was a partner.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was partner number. Well, there were two partners.
Yeah.
There was an employee.
Yeah.
Who was actually going to be an analyst, very good guy, who was doing a lot of work. They identified a trader.
Yeah.
And there was a third partner who hadn't joined yet because he was on a non-compete. So I was fourth or fifth.
Great. So great raw startup.
It was a blank sheet of paper.
Obviously, what I want to get out of this more is so it launched then 2.5, and then what was the journey? It then went to TPG, or what would take?
So what the journey was? So Montreal launched with 2.5 billion, which was drawn down in stages.
Yeah.
And that was another important thing. I mean, we had all this money effectively, but we did draw it down over, I think, 3 months.
Yeah.
We had a very good first year, but we didn't take a performance fee on the first year because for various reasons, it was written into all the docs that we wouldn't take a performance fee until year 2. And so year 1, 2007, we were up, I can't remember, but, 10%, call it, or 12%, something like that, a respectable first year at the time. And then, of course, the second year was 2008. And we crashed. There was no question about it. We were down 28%.
Okay.
And we still had locked. The reason for the 2-year performance fee because of locked up capital.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, like that.
And that made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And so people couldn't get out, which meant that we kept our capital base intact. But of course, as soon as the lock was off, people ran for the door.
Yeah.
And AUM dropped, and I can't remember the exact numbers.
No, it's fine.
But
I mean,
probably halved, almost overnight. But again, coming back to networks that you spoke about, the ex-Goldman's guys knew the TPG Axon guys extremely well.
Yeah.
And the TPG Axon guy had struggled to really get a foothold in Europe.
Yeah.
And so the object of the merger was to give him a European arm. He had a successful business in Hong Kong. He had a successful business in Japan. He just didn't have anything in London or in Europe, actually, and had struggled. They'd had a couple of false starts, and they had a small office off Park Lane, which was very glamorous, but not a lot else.
Yeah.
And we became, or the idea was that we would become the European arm of TPG Axon. I was on holiday in Cornwall at the time when the merger was announced, came back to London for a day, and I'm afraid I sort of recognized that this wasn't quite going to work the way that I think a couple of my partners thought it was going to work.
Yeah.
And I said to them, I don't think this is going to work for me. Yeah. There was a very aggressive COO in New York who was an ex-trader. I mean, he was good he knew what he was doing, but he had a certain style, shall we say. Yeah. And going back in my career, again, I sniffed that style from my earlier career, which I knew didn't work for me personally.
Yeah.
And anyway, suffice it to say, I remember it being said that we're not making redundancies. There's no way anybody's going. We're all going to stick together, blah, blah, blah. And then 3 weeks later, went out to lunch with the partners who basically said, I don't think it's going to work for you, is it, Richard? And I said, no, it's not. Yeah. And we agreed, and we did I think this was sort of, by this stage was sort of September, October. And we agreed I would do a sort of, I would make sure the merger went ahead smoothly, do a handover and leave the following spring.
Yeah. Okay.
And that worked really well for both of us. Yeah. And I think that's when I got a call from you sometime in January.
Interesting to go back to that story, get into for me, because talking about networks has been a bit of a theme of the conversation. I didn't know you at the time, Richard.
No, I didn't know you.
Someone who may or may not be listening to this referred your name to me, and that's how we connected dots on CapeView, well, Trafalgar at the time, right? And just briefly, because what I want to do is be really interested in hearing this story, just the brief CapeView story or Trafalgar CapeView story. Because there's a certain questions I want to ask that I want to really drill into another few things. But just for the people listening, what was the context of Trafalgar CapeView?
So Trafalgar had been a very successful hedge fund. Again, part of it had hit the rocks. The fixed income side had hit the rocks in 2008, not dissimilar to the Montreal story.
Yeah.
The event-driven side, which was a very similar strategy to the Montreal strategy, had a super successful 2008, had navigated it extremely well, and had come out with the world at its feet. I mean, won prizes, had really been successful. And because of that, the fixed income arm had been sort of supported and propped up, and the they'd also been very clever in taking on other strategies, one of which was the ASRI funds.
Yeah.
And when I joined in 2011, I think from memory, well, when I was talking to them, the event-driven fund was about $400 million under management. It had been very frustrated by being used as a ATM machine in 2008 because it was very liquid, and people had obviously gone and taken their money out for, just to make sure they didn't lose any money, which obviously ironically from the Montreal perspective would have been the right move, from the Trafalgar perspective was the wrong move. The fixed income fund was about 400 million, and they had a fledgling ASRI fund of 200 million.
Yeah.
So it was about $1 billion. But between the time that you and I had been talking, it basically the fixed income fund, the event fund closed. It had a couple of redemptions, and that was it. It folded, and that's how CapeView sort of came out of the of the embers. CapeView, the fixed income fund had recovered. It was called the Recovery Fund, actually, which is by name and nature at the time, and it had survived, and it and the ASRI fund became CapeView Capital. And I guess I should actually go back a little bit, because you rang me up and said, I've got this great job for you. I hear you're just the person for it. It's called Trafalgar. And on my side of the fence, I'd heard a lot about Trafalgar and been told it wasn't the place to go. But I said to you, I'll take the advice I would give anybody else. It's always worth going along to listen to what they say. You never know what you might learn.
It's interesting on that point. I was just going to start with that point. And it's, for me, it's one for the people listening as well. I find that, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I always say that there's a lot of opinion around different people, different funds that exist in this industry. And I'm always saying to people, look, go along, have an initial conversation. After that, go and take your own preferences of people.
You can always say no.
Don't go in with a formed opinion, right?
Nothing ventured, nothing gained.
So you got there. Obviously, the business has been an interesting 10 years.
It's been a very interesting 10 years. But I should say that, Trafalgar was part owned by Peter Sill, which was a Goldman's investment. Yeah. And they were quite influential in me taking that job. Yeah. And in fact, part of the interview process was with Goldman's.
No, I remember. You
remember?
Yeah, I remember.
It wasn't just the principals of the firm. Goldman's were very influential.
Quite a unique scenario. I still remember the lunch you had as well. But anyway.
Yes. But also, I took advice from other people, and I got three different opinions. One was go for it. Yeah. One was don't touch it with a barge pole. Yeah. And one was a very considered, these are the advantages and disadvantages. But I think it was Goldman's who finally were the sort of the people that persuaded me that this was a good opportunity, because if it works, it'll be great. And if it doesn't work, the famous words, we'll be there for you.
No, and it's, again, it's something that I always say to people, when you're making decisions, think about worst case scenario, right? And if you're comfortable with that worst case scenario, go for it. And if you're not comfortable with that first scenario, it's the wrong decision.
Yeah, but remember, I was lucky in the sense that, and this is something I always say to people, your CV should tell a story. Yeah. And my CV told a very clear story. I had a solid asset management background. I did a certain type of role within that, within asset management, and I had that to fall back on. And also I had done enough time in enough places with shall we say a good reputation behind me, but you could probably talk more to that than I can, because you obviously did your due diligence on me before you put me forward. And I could afford to take the risk that if Trafalgar didn't work, so be it.
Yeah.
There were good reasons for that. And if Trafalgar did work, then so be it. That was fine too. And indeed, by then I was in my early 50s.
Yeah.
And I've done 10 years there.
Yeah.
And I was COO until 2017 when I became the CEO.
Yeah.
And that was funny because actually it's coming up on Saturday. I was taken out for breakfast by the then founder of CapeView on my birthday, which was 4 years ago now. And I thought, oh, how nice, he's remembered my birthday. That's really sweet. That's not his normal style. But sure enough, it wasn't to say happy birthday. It was actually to tell me that his fund was closing. I just got back from skiing.
Yeah.
And it was the first day back in the office, and he was telling me that his fund was closing, and would I take over as CEO?
Yeah.
And I was CEO until the end of December 2020, when I guess with lockdown, I spoke to my partners and said, look, I'll be 63 in 2021. I've commuted for 27 years. I think it's time I took a step backwards. And what we agreed was that I would retire as an executive in July this year. But in the meantime, I would do 4 days a week for the first 3 months, and then 3 days a week for the second 3 months. So it's a nice way to sort of step down. And I'll go onto the boards of the funds. So, I'm not a golfer, so I do still want to keep my hand in, but I don't want to be a full-time exec.
I think there's a lot of people out there that could do with your advice, Richard. So
I don't know.
I have no doubt you're going to be you're still going to be kept entertained by us all.
We'll see.
No, and what thank you. Like you went through that, and for me again, it was great to hear it. And I think there's two things that stick in my mind from your conversation, from just hearing your story, is just the sheer breadth of the different things you've done, which I think set you up so nicely for that first ABN Amro COO role, and since then hasn't looked back, and then did the startup, and then so from there, and the network, right? For me, like you I mean, even to this day, like I know you treat people very well, but your network is has served you all the way through this process, even unbeknown to you and I at the time. But I realized that with the CapeView process, or the Trafalgar process, that Goldman had a big stake in the decision. And as a result of your previous dealings with them, they knew you inside out and backwards.